Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I'm sorry that this video is coming out a little bit later than I was hoping to release it, but there's just been so much stuff happening this past week because QCinema started at the time this video comes out exactly a week ago. So, every single day has been full of just like lots of interesting, great stuff that I really want to talk about. So before I get into anything, make sure that if you're looking for my thoughts about a particular film or TV show, please refer to the timestamps below in the description, especially if you're only watching this to hear my thoughts about Isa Pa with Feelings. The timestamps are going to be very helpful for you. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So the first thing I'm going to be talking about is a movie that came out about a month ago that I was only really able to catch this past week, and that is Rambo: Last Blood. I'm very willing to acknowledge the fact that this is probably a movie just for the hardcore Rambo fans. But people who aren't fans are still allowed to watch the movie and share their thoughts. So speaking as a non-fan, I really did not enjoy watching this. This is one of the most unpleasant experiences I've had watching a movie this year. As an action film, I just thought it was dull and lacked momentum. And there's just nothing about the violence and the action that to me came off as impressive, really. It was just lots of noise and whatnot. And I get that I'm coming from a very different place, and I understand that. But I also just think, if this is really supposed to be the last chapter in this character's story, it's a really strange way to send off the character. His thing is that he is a war veteran, and PTSD factors into his story. And even in this movie, they make it a point to talk about his PTSD. And the way the film sends him off really has nothing to do with that or with him as a character. It's just completely unsatisfying to a non-fan, so that's where I'm coming from. Yeah, I kind of hated it. The next film I want to talk about is the one that is undoubtedly going to be the popular big film for a while, and that is Prime Cruise's Isa Pa with Feelings, starring Maine Mendoza and Carlo Aquino. Before I talk about how I felt about the movie, I want to just highlight the fact that in a perfect world, the character of Gali, who's played by Carlo Aquino in this movie, would be played by an actual deaf person. And I'm still happy that the movie exists because hopefully this opens the door to a lot of deaf talent. I would be totally happy if this turned out to be the last time that a deaf character is played by an actor who is not deaf. Because let's be real, there are lots of people in the deaf community out there in the Philippines, and it would be amazing to see them have these sorts of opportunities. So yeah, with that said, I love this movie. I really do. It's such a great film, especially as a romantic comedy type thing, because it does so much with the genre, in my opinion. And the reason why I'm semi-okay with the fact that you have Carlo Aquino playing this character is that I feel like Prime Cruz, the director, really is very sensitive with the character and with the character's experience of being deaf. If you watch Prime Cruz's other movies like Sleepless or Ang Manananggal sa Unit 23B, you'll know that he's a fan of silences. He likes putting his actors just into a scene and just letting them sit through a moment or two. And that technique really works here because he spends a lot of this movie making us see things through Gali's perspective. And when we see things through the deaf perspective, we're not just looking at it in terms of the physical aspect of being deaf. Prime Cruz really shows the social aspect of it, the emotional aspect of it, and we really do get invested in this guy through, as a character, and not just because he has a disability. But perhaps my favorite thing about Isa Pa with Feelings is the fact that it really confronts the idea of why these two characters are pursuing romance in the first place. Because I feel like with most romance movies we watch, especially Filipino ones, there's just sort of an assumption that yes, these two people would be good together because nakakakilig siya. But here, for the first time in God knows how long, we're really made to think, are they genuinely interested in each other romantically, or is the whole deaf hearing thing playing into their emotions? And I like that the movie really challenges that. It doesn't necessarily give a straight up answer. It asks us to sort of reflect on it ourselves. Maine Mendoza has come a very long way from her Yaya Dub days, and she's grown into a really competent actress on her own, and she's really good in this movie. But Carlo Aquino is just on another level as an actor. He's, I think, one of the best leading men we have in the industry today. Just he does not exaggerate the death aspect of his character. You really do believe he's the character from an emotional level, and he's not just playing the character as a certain type, you know. And it's one of the most impressive performances I've seen this year, and I really do hope again that it opens doors to other deaf people and deaf actors in the industry. Next up in the realm of TV, let's talk a little bit about the season 2 premiere of The Purge. Now, The Purge is like my biggest guilty pleasure thing. I really enjoy all the movies. The first season of The Purge TV show, however, I really didn't like. I felt like they were taking the wrong approach with it. With the season 2 premiere, I'm like completely back on board because they really do a lot with the world building. They situate a lot of the action behind the scenes, like the people who are sort of monitoring the things that happen during the Purge. But then the season premiere ends with the Purge ending as well, which means that the entire, well, hopefully the rest of the season is going to take place like on non-Purge day, which has never happened in this franchise except for maybe the first Purge. But like, yeah, it's just really exciting new territory for this franchise to go. I'm like a guilty pleasure fan of it, so I'm super stoked. And the acting has greatly improved from the first season. It doesn't feel like these actors and the creator, James DeMonaco, is trying to be cool anymore. Like, it really feels like they're committing, and I'm really excited. However, if you want to talk about really great TV, let's talk about Succession Season 2, which just wrapped up this past week. I was not a huge fan of Succession up to maybe episode 6 of the first season, but now with season 2 over, I can confidently say that it's probably the best drama on TV right now. Comedy, drama, whatever you want to call it. I think it's just a vast improvement in every way. In season 2, I feel like we begin to understand Waystar Royco much better as a company, and I feel like that helps with the satire aspect of it more, because when Waystar Royco was just this sort of mysterious giant conglomerate, it was a little bit more difficult to be sort of emotionally attached or invested in the fate of the company. Now I feel like I really am curious to see what they do with Waystar in the future. But what makes Succession so fascinating as a TV show is that it has some of the best character work in a show that I've seen in a long time. Every time that the Roy family is together, you can tell someone is trying to backstab someone else, or, you know, someone else has a plan that the others don't know about, and it's just all really complex stuff, but all the characters are really complicated and deep and flawed, and you can hate all of them if you want, you can like all of them if you want. It's really fascinating ensemble drama stuff. And this cast is one of the most talented casts on TV today, I think, because they play their characters in such a way where they're really teetering between being actual human beings and being the people that they've been groomed to be, according to Waystar Royco, according to their dad, Logan Roy. And the cast is just out of this world. Brian Cox's Logan is so good at being mean. You have so many great comedic performances from Kieran Culkin, from Matthew McFadden, from Nicholas Braun. But this season really belongs to two actors. You have Sarah Snook, who plays Shiv, who's like the best schemer of them all, but she's not just like this Lady Macbeth stereotype. You can tell she's having fun with it. And then you have the absolute MVP, I think the best performer on TV hands down today, and that is Jeremy Strong, who plays Kendall Roy, who is just so broken throughout this entire season, but he manages to craft such a compelling arc for Kendall, where he's just vying for validation from his father and his family, but at the same time he just has so much regret from the events of the ending of season 1 of Succession. It's just edge of your seat stuff, and like it gets my heart pounding every time Kendall's on screen. It's a great show. I would highly, highly recommend it to everybody. Now let's move on to the bulk of this video, which will just be like semi-rapid fire thoughts on the QCinema stuff that I've seen so far. I've seen 12 QCinema movies by the time that that I'm filming this video. By the time this comes out, I'll have seen like 2 more. But for now, these are my thoughts on everything I've seen so far. So first of all, I watched The Whistlers, an international film that I will admit I didn't really enjoy a whole lot because I had no idea what was going on. It felt a lot like Paul Thomas Anderson's Inherent Vice in that the plot just got way too complicated to follow. And I stayed awake, okay? Like, I tried my best, and it's so difficult to follow. But it is fun though. Like, it's so absurd. The idea that there's even a whistling language in this movie, the fact that everyone is double-crossing each other at every turn. It's entertaining. It's just, you know, don't don't watch it expecting a coherent story. Next up we have Beanpole, and Beanpole is my favorite of the international films that I've seen so far. This is from Russia. I just think it's one of the best written movies I've seen in a long time. Watching it felt like reading a really great novel. The characters in this are so rich and so complex, especially the two protagonists. This movie says a whole lot, not just about the effects of war on people, but especially the permanent effects of war on female veterans and what they have to put up with even after coming home. Like, it's not the same sort of situation, and it's really heartbreaking to see that. The two actresses who play these characters, I'm not going to try and pronounce their names, but please do look them up. They're incredible. I think at this moment, they are my favorite performers of the year in film, hands down. Yeah, it's just whenever they're in the room together, there's so much tension in the air, even if they're not necessarily being violent towards each other, because there's so much baggage between them, and they play their characters in completely different ways, but they're perfect foils with one another as well. Look up the trailer, try and catch it if you can, it's incredible stuff. Next up we have a documentary called Kabul, City in the Wind, which is a documentary set in Afghanistan. What I like so much about this documentary is that it's very much about, again, the effects of war and this very war-torn place, but it's really just showing us peaceful situations. But even when these characters are sort of just walking around doing their everyday routines, you can feel the weight of war on top of them. The subjects in this documentary are incredibly fascinating. These are the kinds of people that I wish we could make documentaries about every year or so, just to track how they're doing, because you know the two main protagonists in this documentary, one is a bus driver who has this keen awareness of the fact that he might not live too long, and then you have a teenage boy who's sort of being forced to grow up much faster than he should be. And it's really sad and heartbreaking, but it's very insightful, at least to me. Next up, we have Lingua Franca, which is directed by, produced by, starring, written by, edited by Isabel Sandoval, who is a trans Filipina director and artist. I have a lot of respect for her, definitely, because you can clearly see how much work was put into this film and how personal it is to her. There's definitely value in her point of view and things. However, honestly speaking, I felt like this was more a personal essay in need of a revision, because I can definitely see the ideas that are being laid out here. I just wish they were assembled in a way that, in my opinion, would have meant more to other people. Right now, it definitely feels like a film that Sandoval made for herself and people who are experiencing the exact same things. But if you're a little bit removed from that experience, it might be a little bit difficult to see every single nuance, and that might just be my fault as a viewer. But also, I do believe plot-wise and script-wise, like, things aren't really arranged in the best way in this film. It is, like, very valuable, though. Next, we have Kaaway sa Sulod, which is directed by R.B. Barbarona, who is another director I greatly admire, because with, like, a shoestring budget, this guy, he really takes it upon himself to talk about things that really no other director in the Philippines is talking about. Like, this movie is very much about tensions between the NPA and the military, and he goes full force in it and like raises questions that we really should be considering. However, I don't think the film is very engaging the whole way through, because it always feels like it's trying to be something else that it's not comfortable being. You know, it's trying to be this pulpy, convoluted action thriller movie, when it's not really very good at that. Like, it's better at the relationship stuff in the film. But most of the film is really taken up by like crime procedural type of thing, and I'm not like a huge fan of that, so unfortunately it didn't really work for me. Next up, we have System Crasher. I would normally think that a movie that's 2 hours long about a child who is incredibly difficult and developmentally challenged would be a pain to sit through. And honestly, it is sort of a pain to sit through sometimes, but for the right reasons. I feel like the director, again, I'm not going to try and pronounce her name, I think she does a great job in letting us feel both the manic moments of this character and the really sincere ones. And as we watch this character go through her ups and downs, we really begin to sympathize and, you know, rack our brains for solutions on how do we really take care of a child who is, by all accounts, pretty much impossible to take care of. The lead actress, Helena Zengel, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is fantastic. Like, I don't know what she's like in real life, but I completely believed her as this character who is just, you know, so much to handle. But her co-star, Albrecht Schuck, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but yeah, like, he's just as good as well, because he has anger issues of his own that he keeps bottled up, and you believe that sort of tension with him every second. Next up, we have For My Alien Friend, which is directed by Jet Leko. This is an experimental documentary. I will admit that I'm not like the foremost authority on experimental films. There are definitely a lot more other people out there who I feel like are much more knowledgeable about film as a medium and as form, and that they can talk about this kind of stuff much better than I can. But just from my own experience trying to engage with the film emotionally and I guess intellectually, there were parts of it that I definitely was not as big a fan of. I was resisting a lot the narrative aspect to the film. Like, I thought it was better when it was just simply raising questions instead of heading toward a particular answer that I felt was maybe a tiny bit contrived. But, you know, for whatever issues I had with the film, like, you can't say that Jet Lego does not know how to deploy images and sounds in really creative ways where you begin to connect different threads throughout the film. It's really interesting stuff. Next up, we have Buoyancy, which is an absolutely stunning looking film. The cinematography is fantastic. It makes these endless days at sea feel truly endless, I suppose, which becomes more disturbing when you remember that this is a movie about human trafficking in Southeast Asia, and it is very depressing and hard to watch at times, but it feels truthful and honest the whole way through. What I love so much about this is that Rod Rathjen, the director, understands and makes us understand that human trafficking does not always... It's not like an on and off switch. Like, sometimes these people who are being trafficked, like the main character here, they're not aware of their situation until they're already neck deep in it. You know, it can be... Human trafficking can look like brainwashing. It can look like a very, very slow process, and for that, I think this film really is very valuable as well. Next up is a film that I consider to be maybe one of the darkest and most emotionally disturbing movies that I've seen in a very long time, and that is Dogs Don't Wear Pants, which is essentially a movie about coping with grief through violent BDSM. This is definitely very tough to watch, but it's completely worth it. I think the atmosphere created in this film is something I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. Just the visuals and the sound of it, like literally every technical aspect of this film is on point, and it just makes you feel this dilemma and this grief in the pit of your stomach. Becca Strang, who plays the lead actor in the movie, really takes his grief to such depths that you completely believe it all the time. It never feels exaggerated, while Krista Kosonen, I believe is her name, who plays the dominatrix who he goes to, really manages to alternate between being completely terrifying and really anxious when she's out of the catsuit. It's just spellbinding stuff, and I don't know if I'll have the stomach to watch it again, but I'm very glad I did. Next up, we have a movie called Vitalina Varela, which is perhaps the slowest movie I've ever seen, which is not a value judgment, it's just the fact that this is a very, very slow film. What's immediately striking to me about this movie is how it looks. I don't know any other movie that looks like this, because 99% of it is shot in almost complete darkness. Like, there are no backgrounds for 99% of this movie. It's really mostly shot in interiors or these low-angle wide shots where you can't see the backgrounds because it's all shadow, which really represents the grief that the main character is feeling. However, by far the most notable thing about this movie is the fact that the character Vitalina Varela is being played by Vitalina Varela. Like, they got the lead actress and her own story onto the screen, and they let her play her own story. So this movie, to me, like, comes across almost as performance art. You know, it's her sort of going through 2 hours of therapy, like revisiting this sort of experience that she had on screen for us to see. And it's really, like, there's so many like things you can pick apart just from that premise, and it is fascinating. It's tough to watch because it's so slow, but it's fascinating. And then you have Bacurau, which is such a crazy film, and I'm glad that I watched it toward the latter half of my QCinema experience, because it was a great pick-me-up, because it's just so weird. I don't know how to describe it. It's like a soft sci-fi, action, western, mystery, satirical, dark comedy thing. with a little bit of horror in it. But what's miraculous is the fact that most of the parts really do fit together, and it becomes like this sort of singular experience. And the most fun thing about it is that it features this huge ensemble cast of characters who are all playing these people in this one town of Bacurau, and they all have like their own moments. They all add to the identity of the town as a whole. Like, these characters are so fun and so endearing that you could really make an entire television series out of the cast, and I would watch every single episode. However, finally, let's talk about the best film that I saw this past week, and not only this past week, but I think this might be my favorite movie of the year so far. I also think it might be the best Filipino film of the decade so far. I am not exaggerating. This is how much I love Cleaners, written and directed by Glenn Barrett. First of all, of course, the thing that people know about Cleaners is the fact that it's made up of 40,000 frames that Glenn Barrett and his team scanned, photocopied, and then manually highlighted with highlighters. And then when they put it back together, it looks fantastic. It doesn't just seem like a gimmick either. As you watch the movie, you begin to forget that it's even, scanned and photocopied and whatnot, and really comes across like a representation of memory and its haziness, in how heightened the reality seems in these memories. And it also, on a personal note, really reminded me of like dumb videos I would make in high school with my friends, except, Cleaners is just 10 times better. Cleaners is essentially an anthology film that tells 4 different stories about different people in high school, really just sort of dealing with the fact that they're sort of outcasted or they've embarrassed themselves in some way. And this movie it wound up being like the funniest thing that I had seen in such a long time. It's so great. Like, the humor stems naturally from the fact that these characters really just, want to be themselves in a world, in a system where they can't really be themselves. And so the humor is juvenile in a way, but the comedic timing is incredible. The use of music especially. If you watch the trailer, you'll know that there is typecast in this movie, and when they played one big song from Typecast, I legit almost cried in the cinema because it was so moving and it was so funny at the same time. And Cleaners really is a moving film, and I don't think it's moving just because it relies on nostalgia, because I don't think it relies on nostalgia. I think if you loved high school and you watch this, you'll be reminded of sort of how innocent things were back then, of how things that don't seem like big deals now were big deals then and were like, huge and whatnot. But even if you come from a different background, or if you hated high school, I think you can still find a lot to love in this movie, because it reminds us that when we were younger, we, really at one point or another had a pure desire to do good. And, today as adults, it feels so difficult to do the right thing. But back then, I guess at least for me, I'm speaking for myself, it seemed so much easier to be good and do the right thing. And I don't know, that really got me. It's so difficult to make a high school movie feel completely sincere. Most big, memorable high school movies tend to feel like they're made and written and directed by adults, sort of looking back in time. Even like my favorite movie of all time is Dead Poets Society, and even that obviously has a level of pretension to it. However, Cleaners really feels like it was made by high school students, but like in the best way. You completely understand the sincerity of their issues, even if they may seem small by our standards. Like, Glenn Barrett found a way to sort of bring us back to the past when these issues were really, they meant the world to us. Now, of course, Cleaners is not going to represent every single high school experience out there. I can just off the top of my head think of 5 different types of people I encountered in high school who maybe won't be exactly represented in the film. However, Glenn Barrett isn't trying to do that, and he does still manage to put a whole lot of different experiences in here. And the way he gets around that, I think, is that by the end of the film, the way the film ends, which is like a magnificent ending, which is one of my favorites of the entire year, that really captures sort of the anger and frustration and desperation that every single high schooler, no matter where you were from, probably felt at one time or another. It's extremely cathartic, and again, it almost moved me to tears. If I wasn't in a packed cinema, I would have started bawling. But yeah, this is one of the most memorable theater experiences I've had in such a long time. I love this movie to death. I love every single thing about it, and I really hope it gets a long life in cinemas one day, and I hope everybody the world over sees it. This is Filipino cinema that I can be truly, truly proud of. Alright, that's it for this week. That was, again, a very long video, but I'm sorry, there was so much to talk about. But yeah, if you guys have any thoughts on any of these movies or TV shows that I talked about, if you want to raise any points or whatever, please leave a comment below. I love hearing from you guys. So till next week, let's have a conversation.